Mary Kate, will you type when we're live? This is very weird.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to a pickle lesson with the Tenement Museum. The Tenement Museum tells the stories of immigrants, migrants, and refugees in the United States, and we are a history museum located in the Lower East Side of New York City. I'm Kat Lloyd from the museum's education department.
Hi, I'm Emily Mitzner.
And we're so glad to be here with you this afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us from wherever you may be located today.
So in this program, we're going to learn about the history of pickles in the Lower East Side. We'll demonstrate an easy way to pickle a cucumber at home and make some connections to how the tradition of pickling continues today.
So if you are tuning in live to this event, please comment, ask us questions throughout the event. Our colleagues are available to answer your questions in the chat. And then Emily and I are happy to answer questions from you throughout the event, and we'll have a special Q&A at the end. So Emily will be back in a little bit to teach us about how to make pickles. So we'll see you soon, Emily.
See you soon.
And I am going to introduce you to the Tenement Museum. So this building, which you may be familiar with, is 97 Orchard Street. It's located in the Lower East Side neighborhood of New York City. And many immigrants and their children lived in this building over about 150 years. Today, no one lives here. It's home to the Tenement Museum, so many people visit it now as it is the Tenement Museum. A tenement is just an apartment building, if you're not familiar. And 22 families lived in 97 Orchard Street over time, each with their own apartment. So each apartment had 3 rooms, and one of those rooms was a kitchen. So every family had their own kitchen when they lived at 97 Orchard Street. So that's 22 families at any one time and 22 kitchens at any one time. The kitchen was the center of the home where meals were prepared and people would come together to eat throughout their busy days, just like today. And often, families that lived at 97 Orchard Street would find themselves wanting the tastes of foods that were familiar to them and reminded them of home, where they came from. Families living in the building, they came to New York City from different parts of the world and brought with them their flavors, recipes, and ways to prepare food. So not everyone ate the same food, of course, but cooking and preparing familiar food in a new place became a shared experience for immigrants who lived at 97 Orchard Street. And we know foods teach us about different cultures and traditions, and that food connects us to other places and countries. So let's begin by exploring who was living in the Lower East Side in the early 1900s. So I want to show you a photograph of the neighborhood in the year 1898. So here we see a photograph of Orchard Street. It's the same street that the Tenement Museum building is on, just a few blocks south. And let's take a close look at the photograph. This is a picture of a street corner. Take maybe about 10 seconds to just look at the details in this photograph. What do you notice? Feel free to share some things you noticed in the chat. So you probably noticed, first of all, the people. The neighborhood was very crowded in the year 1898. About, by some estimates, about 2,000 people lived on every block of the Lower East Side. Today, for comparison, we estimate about 200 people live on every block of the neighborhood. So imagine in this scene, there's people going in and out of their tenement buildings throughout the day. They're going to work, they're running errands, and they're shopping at the market that we see here right in front of us in this photograph. So imagine your grocery store today where you buy food. And then look again at this image with that in mind. This is people's grocery store. So do you see the wheel in the bottom left? It's all the way down in the bottom left corner of the photograph. This is a wheel that's part of a push cart. And this is a really important part of our story today. Some people in the neighborhood throughout the Lower East Side would work as street peddlers. And these peddlers would set up these push carts. They're like large tables with wheels. And they would set them up right on the streets and on the sidewalk. So the peddlers then sold all kinds of products from these push carts. The push carts brought daily necessities right to the front doors of tenement homes. So we can imagine people leaving their homes, coming out into this street, and they really became local markets where men, women, children would be walking around to shop. And that's what we see here in this photograph. We see people of all ages, really, in the street, kids, adults, crowding around the sides of the street, moving from side to side to visit different push carts. You could buy all different kinds of food, fresh fruit, vegetables, fish, eggs, and of course, pickles, which we'll come back to in a minute. So you see a few people carrying baskets that soon will be filled up with groceries that they're purchasing to take home to cook dinner this evening. So imagine for a moment what we would hear if we were standing on this street corner. And what would we smell? Now, between the years 1880 and 1924, many Eastern European Jewish immigrants were settling in the Lower East Side neighborhood, making it one of the largest Jewish cities in the world. So if you look closely, you've probably already noticed this. There are signs on many of the buildings, and some of those signs are in English, and some of them are signs in Yiddish, a language spoken by Jewish people from Eastern Europe, countries like Austria, Russia, Poland, as we know them today. So knowing that people in the neighborhood are from these places, and many of them are sharing this language of Yiddish, what kinds of foods would people be cooking and eating for their meals? How did pickles become so popular in the neighborhood? Let's meet one family who lived at 97 Orchard Street to answer that question. So this photograph, we see two black and white images. There's one photograph of Harris and Jenny Levine. We see them on the left. They're both wearing black outfits. Jenny's wearing a pearl necklace and glasses. Harris is dressed in a suit and tie. And then the other photograph, we see two of Harris and Jenny's 5 children, Pauline and Max. Pauline was the oldest. We see her here wearing a wide-brimmed hat, and Max is seated right next to her. Now, Harris and Jenny moved from Poland to New York City in the year 1890, and they live in an apartment at 97 Orchard Street with their young children. The Levines are a family of 7 people, mom and dad, Harris and Jenny, and then the 5 kids, Pauline, Hyman, Max, Faye, and Eva. So Harris, he has a job as a tailor, and he makes dresses in his family's home, in fact. So he works from the family's apartment at 97 Orchard Street. And we're next going to take a look at the Levine's apartment and see what life would be like for them at home. Now here is the Levine family's parlor. We might call it a living room today. This is the largest room of their 3-room apartment at 97 Orchard Street. And this is where Harris would be working during the day. This workshop would be set up in the living room where he kept a sewing machine. We see that in front of one of the windows with a chair right next to it. And where he would keep the tools to make the clothing together with workers who would come to the apartment every day. So as you can see, there would be pieces of fabric laid out in all corners of the room. In this case, we see they are constructing a bright pink dress. Now, Jenny, Harris's wife and the mother of the family, she also works at home. She's looking after the kids and overseeing the household chores like cooking and cleaning. So she's going to spend most of her day in the kitchen. Let's take a look at the Levine's kitchen and talk about what Jenny might be working on and what she is thinking about when it comes to feeding her family. The Levine's kitchen that we see in this photograph, it's painted a light green, and we see the workshop right through the window. So there's a window in between the kitchen and the front room where the workshop is. In this kitchen, there is a big black stove. It's a little bit hidden in this photograph because there's an ironing board directly in front of it with pink fabric draped over. Next to the stove and the ironing board, we see a child's crib and a sink to the left. Now, when the Levines were living at 97 Orchard Street, there was no running water in the building, no gas lighting or electricity in the tenement apartments. So this means the light that the Levines would be using is kerosene. And a lot of Jenny's time would be spent preparing this kitchen for cooking. So let's look at another view of the kitchen. In this view, we see the other side of the kitchen that connects to the Levine's bedroom. This is through another window and doorway. This bedroom is where Harris and Jenny would sleep, and the littlest one in the family, Eva. So see the big wash tub under the window? It's not connected to any pipes. And without running water, in order to wash and cook with clean water, Jenny and her oldest kids carried buckets of water from the outside tap in the rear yard. They would have to do this many times a day. So this is one reason why cooking takes up a lot of Jenny's day. Having a hot meal means heating the coal stove and probably getting water from the backyard. Now, to keep food cold, the Levines don't have many options. The family doesn't have a lot of money, and so they couldn't afford ice boxes, and people don't really have refrigerators at this period. And so the Levines, they are not really keeping food for very long in this kitchen. Now let's take a look at their options for food storage and get a better sense of the dynamics of this kitchen space. So the kitchen was small by some standards, and there wasn't a whole lot of space for storage aside from a few shelves. And here we see their one cupboard in the kitchen. We see it's full of bowls and plates. There's some newspaper lining the cupboard to help keep it clean. And without a refrigerator, Jenny wouldn't be able to keep food for long periods of time. This meant that dishes had to be easy to make and combined many ingredients in one dish, like a stew. So for example, Jenny might be making for dinner tonight a stew with beef or chicken, potatoes, onions, other vegetables that she would buy from pushcart vendors. Now, there's another important component of the Levines' cooking traditions. The family, they practiced the Jewish religion. So they ate food that was kosher. This means that the food followed the Jewish dietary laws or rules. So some of the kosher laws meant that they did not eat milk and meat together, and they did not eat pork. So there are some important traditions within the Levines' cooking and within what Jenny is making that help us understand how this family would be making a Jewish home for themselves. So let's come back to the kitchen. And we know now one of Jenny's regular chores would be shopping for food, going to the pushcart market nearly every day. Where she grew up in Poland, she's from a place called Poinsk that is smaller than New York City, but it is a town, and she might have had a similar market to go to in Poland. And a big part of her diet there would have been pickled vegetables. Now, because Poland gets very cold in the winter, I've never been, but we can imagine it gets very cold in the winter in Poland, and there aren't many fresh vegetables for those months of the year. So pickling vegetables became an important cooking technique to keep vegetables throughout the winter. So now we can understand a little bit better why pickles are so important in this Lower East Side neighborhood about 100 years ago. Pickles were a traditional Eastern European Jewish food that would have been easy to make, and they're helpful if you don't have a lot of money or a way to keep food, particularly vegetables, cold. So perhaps Jenny would ask one of her children, maybe Pauline or Max, to go out and get groceries and ingredients if she was too busy during the day. Let's take a look at the push carts again and see how Pauline or Max would be doing that shopping, and particularly how they would be shopping for pickles. So we see another street scene. The street is lined with push carts, and there's many people shopping for groceries. Everywhere you look, you see people buying and selling. So take a moment to look at the photo. What else do you notice here? And again, we'd love to hear some of the things you're noticing in the chat. So it's important to remember that while this photograph was in black and white, we would see color everywhere in this scene. One of the details I always notice is what people are wearing. In this photograph, we see a lot of women wearing long skirts and headscarves, and men wearing what were known as bowler hats. So some of these vendors are likely selling pickles or selling cucumbers to make pickles at home. This would be very common in the Lower East Side, as we just learned. In fact, the majority of the New York City's pickle businesses were in the Lower East Side. And there were at least 100 pickle businesses throughout the neighborhood in the early 1900s. Essex Street, just a few blocks away from Orchard Street, was even known as Pickle Alley. So when we were thinking about what the street would smell like 100 years ago, we're going to smell, for sure, pickles as you walk from block to block. Now, remember, many people in the neighborhood didn't have a lot of money. And so finding a good price for food was very important. So let's say Pauline, she's come down to the push carts to buy some eggs and some pickles for the family to have with their dinner. Now, at the push carts, nothing had a price tag. So how did that work? How would Pauline know what to pay? Well, when you wanted to buy something, you would need to get the best deal for an item by doing something called haggling. Now, many of you might be familiar with this. Haggling is a way that the buyer and seller would eventually agree to the cost of something. Everything is negotiable, so customers and peddlers were often shouting at each other. In fact, you can imagine this is going to be a noisy scene. There's many people. So customers and peddlers are going back and forth. 10 cents, no 7 cents, no 8 cents. Okay, 7 cents. Trying to get a price that worked for both of them. Eventually, they would agree. Often, Pauline would be assigned the tasks of shopping for these little things like eggs or pickles, and she might know the vendors who are going to give her the better deal. So she might even walk a couple of blocks further than she has to because she knows that there's a vendor who will give her a better deal on the pickles. Maybe that vendor is from Points in Poland, the same city that her parents are from. Now, Jenny, she would haggle and bargain with these vendors in Yiddish, but Pauline, she was born in New York City. She speaks some Yiddish, some English, and maybe she's going back and forth with these vendors. So kids, you would have to practice your haggling. Maybe your parent gave you 5 cents to spend at these push carts, and you have to figure out how to get the most money and the most products for your nickel. So let's see who you might be buying your pickles from. Here we see a vendor selling pickles outside on the sidewalk in front of a small store. So this is a little different than a push cart because it looks a little more permanent. It's not set up on wheels. And in this photo, we see a kid standing behind some barrels. He's wearing a cap with a brim to protect his eyes from the sun, and he looks to be maybe about 12 years old. So maybe he's the one selling pickles right now. I'm working with the adult who owns the business. Look closely. How many barrels of pickles do you count in this photograph? So I see at least 5, plus 1 up in front of the stand. And there's a scale next to the barrel to weigh the pickles. The barrels are outside of a shop that has a sign in English and Yiddish that says, "We carry a full line of Passover products. Please leave your order for immediate delivery." So might sound familiar to what we experience today, people wanting to order food to have delivered to their home. And this also tells us, again, that there are people in the neighborhood who speak languages other than English. In the shop window, we see there's some other products for sale. We see some jars and some cans. So pickles, they are a popular street food, and people are bringing them back to their apartments, but they're also just eating them on the go, much like we do today with foods that are convenient and easy when we're moving from place to place. Now, these large wooden barrels that we see would be filled with cucumbers or other vegetables and mixed with dill, garlic, kosher salt, and clean water. This is the recipe for what we today might call a kosher dill pickle. And the salt and clean water would start the pickling process. So pickling became a great way to make money. Pickles were sold from pushcarts, from stands like this, and eventually entire shops opened up selling pickles right out of the barrel. So we've switched to a different photograph of another pickle vendor. And in this one, we see jars of pickles lined up, as well as a couple of barrels that are piled high with whole cucumber pickles. So we know pickles are inexpensive to make. They are a good business because they're very popular, and they didn't cost a lot of money. So they end up being good for the business owner and for the customer. Pickling was such a popular way to make money in New York City and in the Lower East Side in the 19 teens and 20s that there were separate businesses. There were people who sold the pickles, but there were also businesses that made the spice mix, businesses that constructed the barrels, like the ones we see here, and separate businesses that made the salt and water mixture for people who were pickling and selling on the street. So there's all of these different businesses that are involved in this pickle industry that are supporting lots of different people's economies and families. So pickles are literally feeding a lot of mouths in one way or another. Now, as we see here in the past, keeping cucumbers whole requires less work. It's less work to pickle, and it's easier to buy because they're easier to eat on the go. So you would see vendors in the past selling whole cucumber pickles, like what we see in this photograph. Now, there were so many pickles in the neighborhood and so many pickle vendors that in 1929, a little bit after the Levines live in the Lower East Side, there was a Saturday Evening Post article. The Saturday Evening Post was a popular newspaper, and the writer of this article said, "There is one store on Hester Street. Hester Street is in the Lower East Side, which probably contains enough pickles to have exhausted the entire cucumber crop of the eastern seaboard." Also, he says, there are enough pickles to have numbed the noses of everyone in the vicinity. So he's basically saying that all the cucumbers on the East Coast in all of the farms are going to the pickles of the Lower East Side, and that everywhere you go, you would smell them. So we know by now, pickles were really popular, they were very inexpensive, and they were a good business. So I see we have a couple questions coming in. So I'll take a minute to answer those, and then we'll talk a little bit more about how you make pickles. So our first question is, where was the smoke from the stoves vented? So this is a really good question. Every stove in an apartment in 97 Orchard Street and in tenement buildings throughout the neighborhood was connected to a fireplace. And the fireplace that had a flue that all connected up through a common chimney. So the smoke is going out of your home, but the chimneys are not venting perfectly. So we know that coal smoke, it's dirty, it's messy, and Jenny Levine is going to be spending a good amount of her time trying to scrub the walls, scrub the floors, keep things clean. So really good question about what a coal stove is like when you're running it from your apartment. Now we have another question about the sort of equivalency of a dollar and what is a dollar worth. So this is an interesting question because it really depends on the time period we're talking. But for the Levines, a pickle might have cost closer to the 1920s when our writer is writing this article in the Post. A pickle might have gone up to about 5 cents. As a comparison, rent for a family like the Levine cost about $12. So $1 is about a 12th of your rent. So that gives you a sense. The rent, it's not that inexpensive. It would have been a lot of a family's income. Harris Levine, we estimate, although we don't know for sure, he might have been bringing in about $5 a month in a good time. So we know pickles, they're inexpensive, but for families who are closely watching their family budgets, as many of us are right now, it's still going to be an investment, and it's still going to be worth trying to get the best deal for your pickles. Now, perfect question to transition us. I see someone has asked, can you only pickle cucumbers? So cucumbers are just one of the types of vegetables and fruits that you can pickle. So let's look at another photograph that will help us talk a little bit more about how you make pickles and what kinds of things you can pickle. So here we see a photograph of 7 different barrels, each with a unique type of pickle. We see carrots and cucumbers and green beans, okra, and hot chili peppers in this photograph. So in the past, for Eastern European Jewish immigrants, cucumbers are most noted. They were most common for being pickled. But other vegetables like cabbage, carrots, onions, and tomatoes were also pickled as a way to make food last longer. So how exactly do we make pickles? I gave you a little bit of a hint before, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with this process, but foods are pickled by putting them in a mixture of water and salt. This mixture is called brine. And the brine creates a reaction to preserve the cucumbers or whatever else you're trying to preserve. So this mixture is left to ferment. That's the word for the reaction that happens when this brine mixture is interacting with the food. And this mixture is left to ferment for several weeks or even up to months, depending on what you're making. Common types of pickles for Jewish immigrants were called half sour pickles or full sour pickles. So half sour pickles, they would be pickled for about 1.5 weeks. Full sour pickles, those are pickled for up to 3 weeks. So you can imagine the longer you let something sit, the more pickly it will taste and the more sour it will be. So it's important to note that Eastern European Jewish immigrants, they did not invent this pickling process. People in China and the Middle East and in different parts of the world have been pickling foods for thousands of years. It is an ancient technique. And many cultures have a tradition of pickling. So think about Korean kimchi, if you've ever had that. That's fermented cabbage or onions or bean sprouts make up kimchi. Mexican pickled jalapenos, maybe you've had those on nachos or tacos, or German sauerkraut. So today for pickled cucumbers, we see them whole, of course, as we would have 100 years ago, but pickled cucumbers also come in many shapes, styles, and forms. They're served in spears and coins, chopped into relish. Cucumber pickles, now we often see them as an accompaniment, sort of an accessory to your meal. We see them on hamburgers, on our falafel sandwiches, as a side dish to dumplings, condiment to your hot dog. So The pickle takes many different forms, and there's also another way to make pickles besides using brine. A quick way to make pickles is using vinegar instead of the salt and water brine. It was more common in the past to use brine, but today people use brine or vinegar or a mixture of both even. So there's a number of different ways that you can pickle your food. And we are now going to dive a little bit deeper into the process of making pickles. And we're going to have Emily come back, and she's going to demonstrate how you can make your own quick pickled cucumbers at home. So I will be back in a little bit. And welcome back, Emily.
Thanks, Kat. So, hi, I'm Emily. I'm joining you from my kitchen to show you an easy way to pickle cucumbers. The first thing we have to do is make sure we have the right ingredients and materials. We are going to need some cucumbers, like this. We're going to need water, vinegar, salt, and pickling spices. If you don't have cucumbers, you can pickle other fresh veggies that you might have around the house. You can use apple cider vinegar like this, or white vinegar works too. For pickling spices, all of this is your choice. So what you can commonly use black peppercorns, garlic cloves, and red pepper flakes if you want it to be a little bit spicy. You could also add mustard seeds, cloves, or fresh dill if you have those around. This is really a great recipe to be creative and use whatever you have in your kitchen. You're also going to need a container to put your pickles in. Usually you're going to use a glass jar like this one, but you can reuse a jar you might have around the house. This is an old tomato sauce jar that I'm going to use. You just need to make sure it's got a tight seal and you can store it in the refrigerator. Let's take a look at our ingredient list and recipe again. So our ingredients are cucumbers, about 2 teaspoons of pickled spices, 1 to 2 cloves of garlic, a cup of vinegar, a cup of water, 1.5 tablespoons salt, 2 jars with lids. If you don't have quite that much, that's fine too. You can always adjust it down. So the first step is to get our vegetables ready to pickle. We can chop our vegetables into slices like you might put on a sandwich, or different strips, so like pickle spears like you might get by at the supermarket, or you can leave them whole if you have small enough cucumbers to fit into your jar. The smaller you cut them, the more pickly they'll get. They'll have more surface to catch the vinegar. So we have to cut up our vegetables. Then we put our pickling spices into the jar and fill with our veggies. So I'm going to take my jar and add some peppercorns, garlic cloves, and red pepper flakes. I'm going to put some chopped up cucumbers in. Try to fit as many in as you can. Remember, the pickles were used to save food as long as you could, so you want to keep everything in there. You want to make sure you're not wasting any space. Fit a few more slices into the jar. Okay. Next, we have to prepare our brine. This is, as Kat said, what's going to make our cucumbers turn tangy and salty over time. So we have to mix 1 cup of vinegar with 1 cup of water in a small pan. So I have to get some water. Measured out 1 cup and put in the pan. And then 1 cup of vinegar. And then we have to stir in 1.5 tablespoons of kosher salt. If you only have regular table salt, that'll work too. Okay. Next, we need to turn the stove on. So some caregivers who are watching may want to do this part for kids who aren't able to touch the stove just yet. Otherwise, make sure you turn it on. And then bring the brine to a boil. Now, the water is going to take a little bit of a time to come to a boil. So since a watch pot never boils, while we're waiting, hey, Kat, can you tell me what pickles are like on the Lower East Side today?
Definitely. And Emily, actually, I was just thinking, you turn on that stove, how long it might take Jenny Levine to get her water to boil over a coal stove. So I'm glad we don't have to wait that long.
Yes.
But the Lower East Side today, you'll find pickles in many stores and restaurants throughout the Lower East Side. Some of you may know that the Lower East Side is pretty diverse still today. There are, a lot of people who are immigrants from China, migrants from Puerto Rico, immigrants from the Dominican Republic. So, throughout the restaurants and businesses from those communities, you'll see different types of pickles. But there is only one remaining pickle merchant who just sells pickles left on the Lower East Side, and that's the Pickle Guys. So I can actually share a few photos of the Pickle Guys with you while we're waiting for our water to boil. So here are 2 photos of the co-owners of the Pickle Guys in the Lower East Side. And they are, as you said, the sort of last pickle vendor in the neighborhood, and that they are the only shop and business that exclusively sells pickles. And the owner of the shop and founder, who you see here on the right, is Alan Kaufman. He's the one reaching out with the jar of what look like half-sour pickles. And Alan Kaufman, he is 3rd generation. His grandparents immigrated from Russia and Poland in the early 1900s, so around the time the Levines were living in the Lower East Side. Alan himself was born in Brooklyn, raised in Queens, and Alan started working in pickling in 1981. When his business, they typically sold 5 to 7 different kinds of pickled items. Today, the Pickle Guys, which he opened in 2001, and the Pickle Guys offers up to 34 different types of pickled items. Now, we can talk about the different types of pickles they have in a little bit. The Pickle Guys, they use no chemicals or preservatives, only natural coloring. So as an example, they use beet juice to turn their turnips red. So this is a common type of pickle, pickled turnips. And often those are pinkish color, and they get their pink color from the beet juice. The only thing that has changed about the pickling process over the years for the Pickle Guys is that they went from wood barrels to plastic. So you see here that they're using plastic barrels in their store. They also had to start wearing gloves. You see Alan's extended hand is gloved. We're very familiar with this right now. Of course, it is for health code reasons, to keep himself, his customers, and his employees safe. So the Pickle Guys, they have 2 different locations in the neighborhood, and they actually run a thriving online business. So you can order pickles from anywhere in the US, directly from the comfort of your home, and the Pickle Guys will ship it to you. Now, I'm going to take us back to Emily's kitchen and see how our water is coming along.
Yeah, it's really, the Pickle Guys are great, and they're still taking orders right now. So if you like to order anything from them, their website is thepickleguys.com, or no, sorry, it's just pickleguys.com. So you can check them out. My water is looking pretty hot, so I'm going to turn off the stove. And we're just going to pour it over the vegetables in the jar. And do this carefully and fill to within about a 1/2 inch from the top. So we're going to seal our jar and then let it cool to about room temperature and store in the fridge. These are what's known as quick pickles or refrigerator pickles. So they do need to be stored in the refrigerator. They're a little bit different from the way Jenny and Levine might have made them. So they might not be good for years or anything like that, but they'll be good for weeks at least. So they can last a long time and they will get more delicious with time. The hard part right now is that you do have to wait about 2 days before you crack open the jar. The longer you let them sit, the more deliciously pickled they'll be. I actually made some pickles over the weekend with beets, which I'm really just now opening for the first time. So you have to wait a few days.
That's exciting. Those sound a little different than cucumber pickles and perhaps a little bit more colorful.
Yes, you can see they're very red in the jar here.
So I'm glad you mentioned that you're pickling something else other than cucumbers, because I want to bring us back to conclude with a little more about the Pickle Guys and a little more about what else they pickle and what else you can find pickled today in the Lower East Side. So thanks, Emily, for teaching us how to make our refrigerator pickles. And I'm going to come back to the Pickle Guys here with Alan and his co-owner. So Alan, today he has a co-owner who's Chinese American, and together they employ people from different parts of the world. Many people still think of the Pickle Guys as being a Jewish store because Alan himself is Jewish, and he is carrying on a lot of the Jewish tradition that we saw with the Levines in the 19-teens. But many of their employees are immigrants from China or the Caribbean, as is really common throughout the Lower East Side and New York City today. So one day, one of the Caribbean workers told Alan about something that is pickled in his home country, pineapple. He is from the Dominican Republic, and his grandmother used to make him pickled pineapple as a child. So he told this to Alan. Alan got really excited and wanted to know the recipe. Alan started making this pickled pineapple and loved it, and now sells it alongside his other pickled items. So this is just one of the other types of pickled foods you can purchase at the Pickle Guys. And today it's one of his top sellers, the pickled pineapple. It's made with clove and a little bit of red pepper spice, and it is absolutely delicious. So here we come back to our barrels of different types of pickles and a list of all the different things you can buy from the Pickle Guys and have shipped to your door. So we see our sour and half sour, but also tomatillos, string beans, hot peppers, our kraut, olives, mushrooms. So really the sky's the limit, and pickling, like Emily said, is a great way to experiment, be creative. Now, the Lower East Side still celebrates its pickle heritage with the Lower East Side Pickle Day every year. It's generally held in the fall, so hopefully we will still be able to host a Pickle Day this year. But the pickles are celebrated during this festival that honors all of the immigrants who have come through the Lower East Side and the pickling traditions they have brought with them. So there's German sauerkraut and Korean kimchi, Middle Eastern pickled turnips, Chinese pickled lemons, Japanese plums, the ubeoshi that you might be familiar with from the Japanese tradition, Indian pickled mangoes, as well as our cucumbers. So as we've seen, pickles, they preserve food, and they also preserve culture and help create new culture in a place like New York City, where people from so many places are arriving new and sharing their food traditions with their families and with each other. So we've learned that pickling has taken many forms over the last 100 years in New York City, and that people often experiment with what they can pickle, which we hope you will do today as well. Be inspired by what you saw and to preserve some food of your own. So we would love to hear from you now and see what questions you have about the Levines, about the Lower East Side, and pickling traditions past and present.
Yeah, it's really fun to try pickling different things. I think I've got some pineapple left over, and so I'm going to try pickling with some of my extra brine too. We'll see how that turns out.
That's great. I have some pickled mushrooms in my fridge right now from a trip that I'm excited to crack into. So I saw that we had a question previously about whether Irish people ever picked up pickling. So this is a really good question because we know one thing that happens in a place like New York City when so many people from different places are interacting with each other, that people pick up each other's food traditions occasionally. And the first thing that comes to mind for me is actually what is today known as an Irish tradition of eating corned beef. So corned beef, while it's not exactly like the pickling we learned about today, it actually is a type of preserving. It is called salt cured. So that kind of process is similar to what we see with pickling vegetables. You wouldn't use exactly the same kind of brine to pickle your corned beef, but it would help preserve the meat to keep it good for longer. So corned beef is one way that Irish people really were preserving food in the United States. So I see another question come in, where were all the cucumbers grown at the time? So obviously in New York City, there was not a whole lot of farming space. So the pickles have to come in from other parts of the state, other parts of the country. So this is a really interesting question because a lot of the same dynamics happen today. It's hard for people who live in cities to grow food. So people who are farming are living in more rural areas and sending their food to the cities, as well as keeping food for themselves. So there were farms in New Jersey, in upstate New York, and there are farms even, as far flung as slightly in the Midwest that might be sending their cucumber crops to cities, whether that's Chicago or New York. So I think there were many different places that cucumbers were grown, but there were, in the 19 teens and 20s, we do start to see the rise of large companies like Heinz, who might be working with particularly larger farms and even farms of their own to source their cucumbers and other products that they're selling pickled. So great question.
Kat, I saw another question about if you use the same recipe no matter what you pickle. And I think the answer is you could. You can try whatever you want. So you'll get a slightly different flavor based on what kind of vegetable you use, what kind of vinegar you use. If you use apple cider or white vinegar, or you could try rice vinegar. You'll get a different flavor based on what kind of spices you choose to put in, whether it's just something spicy or black pepper or any fresh herbs that you might have. So it's really sort of up to you in terms of how you put it together. And as long as it's the basic process is the same though, no matter what you do.
That's right. And, the way I often remember it is that an easy pickle brine is just 1-to-1 water and vinegar. Yep. So whatever kind of vinegar you use the same amount of water as you do vinegar, mix those together, about 1.5 teaspoons of salt. And what I really like to do, because I have a bit of a sweet tooth, is add a little bit of sugar, like 1/2 teaspoon of sugar, maybe a little bit more. I particularly like that with pickled carrots. So you can, like Emily said, get creative with what kinds of spices. I know I've been really turning to my pantry, pull out all of the things that have been in there for way too long to put those into pickles and just see what happens.
It's just also a question if you could heat up the brine in the microwave. That probably works too. It's mostly to kind of get it all melded together. So it makes it a little bit easier for kids too.
That's right. That's right. Basically what you want to do is, let the salt or sugar dissolve. Yeah. So that's really the essence of heating the brine before you pour it over, because otherwise the salt gets stuck at the bottom.
Kat, I think that might be all the time we have for today.
I think so. And we really want to thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon. We know that there's so many different events that you can be attending virtually. And we're really honored that you chose to join us to learn about the Levines and the Lower East Side and the rich history of pickles, past and present, in the neighborhood. So we hope you enjoy learning with us. We hope you'll join us next week. Next week, we'll be making paper flowers and learning about what kinds of work kids did in the past. So you can tune in, same time, same place, 3:30 on our YouTube channel. And as well, you can keep in touch with our website on our events page. That's where we'll be posting all of our upcoming events. We have a couple of really good ones coming up in the next few weeks. So take a look at the events listings on our website for what other offerings we'll have right now. And also don't forget, sign up for our newsletter. As well, if you liked this event, we hope you'll consider sparing us a nickel. Every penny counts, as we know, especially right now. So thank you again so much, and we hope you enjoy your pickles.
Bye-bye.